Chapter 5, Project Scope Management. This is all about managing the work that happens on a project and deciding what goes into a project and what doesn't go into a project, as well as documents like a work breakdown structure that can help direct and guide the work of a project. As a bit of an overview, in this chapter, we're going to understand the importance of good project scope management, how to plan for it. We're going to look at different methods for collecting requirements. We're also going to talk about why collecting requirements is so important and why it's so difficult to do. We're going to talk about how to create what's called a work breakdown structure, and we'll do a mini version of this in class as well. We're also going to talk about the importance of validating and controlling scope. Almost half of this chapter focuses on project selection, and you have to choose the right projects. If you don't, nothing else really matters. You could spend a year working on the wrong project, but how do you know if it's the right project at all? Well, there are things you can do to help make sure that you do pick the right project. So we're going to spend a lot of time talking about that as well. The opening case involves someone named Kim, and she is in charge of her company's IT upgrade project. She wants to create a work breakdown structure. Now, in this case, the scope of the project was predefined by corporate standards, and there was a charter developed, there was initial scope statement, but Kim needed to collaborate with other people to get the work done, and to do that, she wanted to develop a work breakdown structure, but she wasn't really sure how to do this. This isn't the best opening case ever. We've had better ones, but it's not bad. So it is what it is, and we'll go with it because it's what we got for this particular chapter. In terms of scope management, this Dilbert comment kind of pokes fun at the idea of managing project scope. It's often a tricky thing to do, and before we get too deep in the weeds with scope, I want to give you two examples that hopefully help you understand what scope is all about. So rather than dictionary definition, here are two real-life definitions or real-life examples of managing scope. So the first one is the TV show Trading Spaces. This show isn't on anymore. It aired from 2000 to 2008. And it involved two sets of neighbors who redecorated a room in each other's house, and they would trade spaces. The cost and time were set from the start. So every episode of this show, these neighbors had $1,000, so the cost, and a specific amount of time, 2 days. So the work that could be done in that constraint with $1,000 in 2 days, that was called the scope. And the owners had no say in what was going to happen with their home. So in other words, the scope was wide open as long as it fit the cost and time constraint. So what can you do with only 2 days, with only $1,000? That's a good question. Do you remodel a whole bathroom, whole kitchen? I doubt you could do that for $1,000, but you had to, or the people in the show had to decide what to do, what work should be done, what the scope of the project should be given those constraints. So another example of not of Trading Spaces, but of scope is the original Google Glass. So the original version of Google Glass is shown here, and this is kind of a preview version that came out in 2014. And it seemed like a neat idea. It involved having a virtual overlay projected onto your eyes as you walk around. So this thing here was sort of a camera that almost had like a heads-up display from a first-person shooter game, and it displayed information about the world around you on your glasses or right as you were looking out at the world. And among its many issues was project scope. Google couldn't quite decide what exactly this thing should do. What work needed to be done throughout the life of this project for this particular thing? Scope management would have helped, and it would have helped create a more refined, purposeful project as opposed to whatever this ended up being, which was sort of a jack of all trades. We don't know what it's going to do. We're just going to make this thing and hope for the best. So hopefully those two examples give you an idea of what I mean when I say project scope. It's the work that you need to do on a project. In the opening case, the project was about upgrading the computers. Well, figuring out the scope involves defining what do you mean by upgrade? Who defined that scope? What does that scope mean? Does it mean every computer in the company or just some computers? Does it mean upgrade hardware, software? What components of hardware need to be upgraded? What about ancillary components like desks? What does upgrade the computers mean? And figuring that answer out is the scope of the project. Remember that the top 2% of project managers spend twice as much time planning, and scope is a big part of that planning. In terms of scope management, the scope is all the work involved in creating the products of the project or the end result, as well as the processes used to create them. I like to think of it in a little simpler terms. I basically like to think of it as a summary of the project. So if you were to summarize in one paragraph what the project is all about, that would be the scope. You can get a lot more detailed in terms of scope, and we'll see a couple examples in this chapter of really detailed scope measurement, or not measurements, scope statements. That's not the level I'm going for here. I just want you to know that as far as I'm concerned, as far as what you'll need to know as a project manager, it's the work that's going to be done on a project. If you could summarize the project in about a paragraph or a couple minutes, what would it be? Just like if we go back to that Trading Spaces example, if you were one of the families redecorating someone's house, if I asked you, what's your project going to be? And you could tell me in about a paragraph, redecorate the bathroom, and that means replacing the sinks, replacing the countertops, and that sort of thing. That would be the scope of the project. Managing scope is essential for success of a project. It involves 6 main processes that we're going to start going over in the next video.